Yeah? Okay. My name is Kevin Garcia. I am a indie comics creator, and I've been in comics for a bit. I host a lot of these panels, but for this panel, I'm kind of part of it, because it's part of an ongoing discussion. And it's always tricky finding the right name, because we're talking about, like, is it Latino, which is technically a plural, but also has, should we do Latinx, which by the way, I have at least one person tell me it's Latinx. And I asked him why, and he goes, a Latinx person told me that's how you say it. And I was like, he was messing with you. And then Latine is one that I've been using a lot, and a lot of things that works really well. But for Latinidad, it's both a word that exists, and it also covers what we need. So this is the community, and we're talking about both the characters, the creators, the environment as it's both perceived and gone out. So what I'd like to do is kind of go around and have each of you kind of introduce yourselves a little bit. We can pass the mic around. It may not be in whatever order people are sitting. So let's start with Nico. Nico Rodriguez, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do? And since I heard you guys talking about it beforehand, where your families originate from. Myself, for example, Mexico, but also Scotland. So both.
Yeah. Yeah, how's it going, everyone? My name is Nico Rodriguez. I'm a cartoonist from the Houston area. Father's side is Colombian, mother's side is American, so kind of mixed bag there. So yeah, I've been making comics for a good 8 to 10 years or so, seriously. I did a graphic novel called West Not South, which is kind of a crime comedy book, basically about a city mouse who moves to the far west with his best friend. They get involved in a wacky revenge plot. BoJack Horseman meets the Coen brothers is kind of how I pitch it. And I also do a couple other books. The World is a Funny Page. It's more of like a detective fiction book. I kind of call it artsy Indiana Jones, about a art crimes PI that has to find this very unique comic book. And then Eclosion is the one that I've just put out. It's kind of a sci-fi horror book. It's about a research scientist who's on a unknown planet. While she's researching, she kind of contracts this crazy parasite, and it's kind of taking over her body. So the whole story is about her trying to get off the planet. But yeah, in terms of my work, I'm much more into the cartoony side of comics. Never been so much into like the big superhero-y kind of stuff. And also kind of like, I use a lot of watercolors, and try to use other different media just to kind of, keep things fresh and kind of keep experimenting with things. So I think that kind of brings out like a surreal kind of vibe to some of my work. But yeah, I think that's kind of a solid introduction of me and my work.
Perfect.
Cool.
Now, Danny Flores. And we have passed the mics around. It all works.
Hi, I'm Daniel Flores, Danny as well. My dad is Puerto Rican, and my mom is Mexican from Texas. Texican? I don't know, Chicana. She calls herself Chicana. So I am illustrator and editor at Plus Waco Comics, an indie publisher that me and two other guys started in like 2019. Opposite of Nico, we are into the big bombastic superhero genre kind of thing, and we decided to just start our own line to put books out there that we wanted to read. And we focused on more ethnic diversity of our characters, because that was another thing that we saw. Like, hey, there's a lot of white characters. Like, that's where it starts. Like, that's the starting point. We're like, why not make others? So, and that's what we're doing. So,
all right. Thank you very much. By the way, we're going to do introductions. I do have some questions I want to talk to these guys about, but if you guys have questions, pop up a hand. We'll get to you as soon as we have a chance to do that. All right. Miguel?
Sorry.
You can leave it on if you do it right.
That's still okay. Hi, I'm Miguel Myers Villa.
Can I just pause for a second? That I was like, Miguel Myers. Miguel, why does that sound? That was, oh, wait a minute. Horror. I like that. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a horror dude. I'm the horror guy. So I write. I'm obsessed with horror. So I come through everything, literally everything in my life through the horror lens. And so when it was time to, when I decided to start writing comics, I was like, naturally, it's going to be horror comics. And I had never written anything in my life. And then the pandemic happened, and my friends scattered, and I was like, I want to work on a project with you. So I did a story with my friend Zach Chapman, and it was fun. And I said, if this idiot can do it, I can do it too. And so I had a gem of an idea for Aztec Death Whistle, and I was like, okay, I'll do it. And when I did it, because it's an indigenous story, I wanted to have representation. So I was like, oh, I want everybody connected with the comic to be Latino. And that's really important to me. And I found that it's really satisfying to do that. And even before, when we did the Haunted Rental, which was the story I did with my friend, I wanted to have a black artist, and I wanted to have a Latina colorist and all that. So I want to make the stories that I didn't see, and I want the representation that I didn't see. So that's what's important to me.
Thank you. Move on. Laura? Laura Cañas?
Yes. Hi, so I'm Laura. I moved here like 3 years ago. I'm from,
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm from Colombia, and a city in the middle of the mountains there in Colombia called Medellin. I learned to do comics in Colombia thanks to like a lot of people there and that were doing comics before me and were very like generous to teach like my generation, and my generation grew. Like I learned to do comics like 10 years ago with them, and now I feel like we are passing, or that knowledge is kept passing like through the generations. Yeah, so my comics are, I do like little zines, so I'm not published or anything. Everything I do is like very little, and I don't have like a big collection of work because it's very difficult to find time and energy and resources to do it if you're just like beginning and you have a regular job.
I don't know what that feels like.
And so my zines are, I was just thinking they talk a lot about like my relationship with nature, which I'm always like looking for because I feel like being raised in Colombia was just like being in contact with nature every time, even though I'm from a really big city. It's like bigger than this, and there's a lot going on always in Medellin. It's like, it really has more vibes of a city that Austin has, and I really miss that. But I feel like you are always like, I don't know, 1 hour away from a little town, and it's not like this that you have to go through a big highway and you don't see like anything really beautiful around. Like when I go out like 20 minutes away from my city, all I see is like very tall trees and like it's always like very beautiful. So yeah, I feel like that's what I bring up from Latin America in my comics.
Thank you. I was saying a second ago, I think we all can sympathize with that idea that it's hard to get that energy when you're entirely in charge of it, because it's a lot.
Yeah.
All right, next I would like to talk to Fajardo. Kat?
Worst for last. No, I'm just kidding. So my name is Kat Fajardo. I am an author, illustrator, cartoonist, a lot of titles, but I make predominantly graphic novels for middle grade readers, so for ages 8 to 12. And my first book is Miss Quinces, which is about the quinceañera experience, but coming from someone who didn't want to celebrate it. And so that's based on my own experience, especially taking place in Honduras, where my mom is from, and my dad is from Colombia as well. So I do a lot of works based on the Latina experience and culture, but also about self-reflective like aspects of like finding your identity within that cultural tradition and like trying to find yourself in all that mess of identity. And so I have a second book coming out, which is a sequel to Miss Quinces, coming out I think in July. And it's based on my experience as a camper, being away from home for the first time, not being surrounded by my parents, and like cultural food and what is meatloaf, like, you know, like all that things. So that's the second book. And I actually, before started doing graphic novels, I actually did a lot of zines and illustrations based on my identity as a Latina in America. And so one of my first stories, one of them was called Gringa, which is based on my experience dealing with sexism, racism, all the isms that comes with being a person of color in America. And they started off as like diary comics, which inspired later works, such as one series called Bandida Comics, and it's like a series of zines about like, you know, diary comics, but also like growing up with like certain superstitions or like remedies growing up in a Hispanic household. And so I just like to reflect a lot about the Latinidad experience, I guess. So yeah.
Yeah, like you said, getting used to cultural foods. I grew up on the border. I did not know what a snickerdoodle was until like 2 years ago. Literally, we're going to a work party. He was like, "I'll bring snickerdoodles." Like, "All right, I'll bring thingamabobs." And everybody's like, look at me like, "That's a real thing?" Like, I had no idea. So my name's Kevin Garcia. Again, I have a family that is from Mexico, although my friends have always called my family the least Mexican family they know, because there's no cheese man. We never fight. That's because we never talk about anything.
That's the most Latino.
Yeah, right. So there
That's
you go.
the most Latino
I'll
thing I've
take
ever
it.
heard.
Suppress it.
Oh,
Suppress that. Keep it deep down.
Basically, yes, all about suppression, which just means I get to put a little bit of emotion into my stories. On that note, one of the first comic that I self-published was Teoat, and the idea was that I'd just seen all of these stories that would involve Mesoamerica. Even Apocalypto, which is, let's ignore the director for a second, which is entirely in indigenous language, but it ends, spoiler alert, with the Spaniards showing up. And I was tired of it being like, well, the Spaniards are important. So I set mine several hundred years earlier. And I did a story that takes place before the founding of Tenochtitlan. So every single person in my book is somebody that there is a record of living in the Valley of Mexico in 1325. I read a lot of books. I read a lot of books written throughout the colonial era, obviously some more modern ones, but I really wanted to get as close as possible to that time period. There's only one person in my book that is not a known person to have lived there, and that is because she exists through oral tradition. I can't find a name for her, so I just called her daughter in Nahuatl. And then, and I consider this a proof of concept. I want to go back in with another artist and maybe make it a full graphic novel that would end with an eagle on a cactus, because there's a whole story that leads up to that. And then in a couple weeks, I have this children's book coming out. I have my first children's novel coming out. I'm excited. I was hired to do a story. These are real life luchadors. It's a family. And I'm doing a story about them when they were kids fighting monsters. And when they hired me, they said, we want them to fight movie monsters, classic movie monsters. And I said, okay, but if you want a green skin, flat top Frankenstein, you have to pay universal money. And they go, and I said, what if I had them fighting creatures from Mexican folklore? And they were like, well, think about it. And a couple weeks later, they said, hey, we got an idea. What if you had them fighting creatures from Mexican folklore? I said, what a good idea you guys had. That's amazing. So I have the I can't even talk right now. Tilcoat. I can say it when I'm thinking about it, but right now, which is a snake the size of like a couple school buses. So these are all pre-Columbian stories that were written down by colonial priests and stuff to kind of keep track of. And it had a lot of fun incorporating stuff like coronarismo and stuff in there and making it more of a whole. I want to point out real quick, we're talking about Puerto Rico and Colombia. A lot of times when people say Latino, especially in Texas, we're talking about Mexico. And one thing I'm finding more and more since moving to Austin is whenever I get groups of people to talk about it, we end up having a lot of representation from, again, we're not a monolith. Even if you're talking about people from one country, they're not going to have one solid voting block, which is something that the TV news is always looking for. So I want to ask you guys a little bit about that kind of stuff. But before I do, I want to say again, if anybody has questions, pop a hand up and we'll go to you. All right. So given that we have several people here from different kinds of backgrounds, I want to ask, how do you feel about that kind of representation? Are you okay with the idea of Latin America being lumped together as one solid thing? Do you think it shouldn't be? What are your thoughts on that? Laura?
Well, I think that I was thinking about before coming here, like how could I answer this question, and I just realized that I don't even know. Like I go to learn a lot of books in the public library, and I don't even know how many how many like Latin American authors have I found there. So I would say like there's like what, like 3 or 4 or 5, I don't know. So I do, and then I thought like I wish they would have like a section of Latin American authors. And then I think like even if it sounds like, oh, then they will put everybody in the same block, I think like having a section will like make it more diverse, because yeah, I cannot like relate. I feel like, for example, Argentina or like Chile, they're more like, or depending, but they have like a very different like experience from other countries in the top of South America, and then Central America or the Caribbean is like very different from the Andes, and so yeah, I don't think there's enough, and I think they should definitely like think about it. And also like in the bookstores, like in the comic bookstores, I wish there were like a whole section for Latin American authors. Yep.
I'll just say, so my mom is Puerto Rican, my dad's Mexican, so we're like the opposite. But when we get like families together, like we don't even speak the same Spanish. Like, so it's like you can't lump people together, because like my experience as a dark-skinned Mexican is going to be different from somebody's experience as a light-skinned Puerto Rican. You know, so it's completely different. So I want to hear stories from Chile or Colombia or Honduras, like you were saying, or Puerto Rico, or like it's going to be different experiences.
Real quick, you mentioned the language being different. My Spanish, I speak Spanish like the way Tarzan speaks English. Me hungry, where food, you know? It's funny because when I'm back at home in Brownsville, people will talk to me in Spanish assuming I understand, and I usually do as long as they speak slowly. And I come here to Austin, and people assume that I don't understand Spanish at all, so they'll try really hard to like look at their phone and translate it to English. And I can't really tell them, well, just speak to me in Spanish, because I can't understand perfect Spanish. So I feel like I want to say something. But I recently learned that apparently I speak Chicano English, because I've had my friends who are not, you know, from the border saying, why do you word things like that? And I never really thought about it. And then there's been this trend lately of explaining Chicano English on TikTok, and I'm like, oh, that's literally the way I talk. Okay, all right, I got that. Kat, I know we've talked about this before in other panels. Could you give us your thoughts on this? On the idea of representation, inclusion, that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So actually, I've been on TikTok a lot recently, and I always get these videos of like, you know, using Latinx as like a term, like how that isn't real, and like I would get into like discourses, and, you know, like just fights about it. But one argument that someone brought up was just like how Latinos that grew up in the US aren't considered Latinos in the definition of Latin America. And I just found that really fascinating, because like coming from New York, especially like growing up, I grew up with like Puerto Ricans, like Dominicans, like all these different backgrounds, and like we all just consider ourselves Latino as like, not a monolith, but just like as a community. And so like, the idea of like, yeah, like even though your background, like let's say if you're like second generation, like Puerto Rican or something, we still consider you as Puerto Rican. And you know, I love Puerto Ricans, and especially in New York, because they're just like very loud and vocal about it, and I absolutely love it. But yeah, they have like a whole parade, and it's wild. But like the idea of just like discrediting someone's like background based on like, oh, you don't speak Spanish, so you're not considered Latino at all, which I just don't understand that idea completely. And I never really met a Chicano like many generations until I moved here to Texas. Because in New York, we mostly get like first generation, like people who just recently arrived from Latin America. But like here, it's just like, oh, I met someone whose, you know, ancestors like built the Alamo. Like it's just like wild how many like generations of like, you know, Mexicans and Chicanos have been, you know, here for so long, and I never for a second thought to discredit their background at all. I'm just like, oh yeah, you're a Chicano, even though like you're white passing, but like I still, if you still believe in that, then I feel like that should be credit enough, you know, like, I don't know if it makes sense, but I just don't think it should be grouped, but at the same time, I think it helps us kind of just form a community in that sense.
It was funny, in Brownsville, I would never say I'm Mexican, because I know people from Mexico. But yeah, it's about finding that identity, and so many people I talk to are just like, we don't care what words you use to describe yourself, but we get it. Yeah. Again, I'll take questions from the audience if anybody has one.
More just commentary on it.
Also good.
I think there's also kind of a little bit that there might be people that assume that Latinidad, Latin American people in general see themselves as a monolith just because, but it's really not. Like, just to get personal, I'm from a town called Laredo. It's a border town about 4 hours south of here on I-35, which is a horrid drive. But yeah, the thing is that Laredo's a little bit different in that the population is somewhere in the realm of like 95 to 98% some form of it's like some form of Latino, mostly Mexican, and there's kind of like, it's kind of weird because then like there's occasionally a divide between people on what specific like country you're from. And like, I have a friend of mine who's half Puerto Rican, and his dad honestly lost friends because his friends kind of kept crap talking Puerto Ricans. It's like, hey, that's my wife you're talking about, don't you know that? And it's just like, you know, if you're not, like in a town that's mostly Mexicans, it's like they kind of like, oh, well, you're Cuban, you're Puerto Rican, you're Argentinian, you're from somewhere else. It's like kind of, you're not free from being other just because there's an entire monolith, like almost monolithic population of Latin American people.
Well, speaking for myself, like I said, I'm from Brownsville, which is also on the border. And it's funny, you can look at Brownsville's yearbooks going back and you can see white flight happening. Like Chris Christopherson is from Brownsville, but nobody knows that because they're like, there's white people in Brownsville. Like, there was, but not anymore. So yeah, that's an interesting part. Nico, with your stories, you put a lot of that kind of that Southwest into it. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of one of the big things in traditional Latin American and Mexican cultures is like that masculinity of it, and I think that that's something that's kind of universal, when it kind of comes to those things, and
As an expectation.
yeah, as an expectation. So I think that's something that can kind of unite like the Mexican with just like the Latin South American things. There's kind of that same kind of sentiment around traditional ways of thinking. So I mean, I think that that's something that I kind of try to put into my books, especially with West Not South, for example. It's the lead character's name is Raul. He's a kind of like a down, out of his out kind of mouse, and he's kind of constantly fighting these kind of like masculine types of thinking and things that he should be doing. So I mean, I do think that that's something that can kind of bring the two together. But in terms of lumping as a whole, of course, I would love there to be a little bit more separation, between it all. But I mean, I do think that as I continue to explore alternative comics, I mean, there's so many alternative comics out there, and I think there's a lot of things are kind of coming to light a little bit more nowadays.
Getting more of that, as my friends have put it, not so much diversity as there's inclusion.
Right.
And on that note, Danny, you were talking about wanting to make sure that there was a variety of people that more representative of Plus Waco, in Plus Waco. So how do you feel about all this?
Definitely being othered by white people, black people, just like we get othered and then we other each other internally. It's hard, like growing up, like everyone growing up with a split family. I know my grandfather hated my dad. He hated, like, don't bring that Puerto Rican in this house. But eventually my dad showed that he was man enough to take care of my mom, and my grandfather got over that. I think in our books, when we're saying that a lot of things are coming to light, and it's the inclusion, well, part of that is that we're exposing all these trauma events in our lives growing up, and people are seeing that, and it's across all cultures. Like, oh yeah, and they can relate to that. When you can relate to something, you find that commonality, and you kind of drop the pretense of, oh, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm Cuban, I'm Dominican, I'm Colombian, I'm Argentinian, and you start seeing, like, yeah, we are Latin together, we are Hispanic together. I prefer us to be considered Latin together as opposed to outsiders, like, they're just Latin. Because when we do it internally, we can parse between ourselves, like, yeah, I'm Puerto Rican, but this is what I'm bringing to the table. Yeah, I'm Colombian, but this is what I'm bringing to the table. You know, I do like the idea of having, like, sections for Latin creators, and but going about that, and, like, do we break it down individually by country at that point? I don't think that's necessary. I think, you know, we should just be represented together in that fashion. In like I said, just exposing everything that we have, and sharing the common threads throughout all our stories really kind of knits us together.
You know, you guys talk about that internal exclusion that happens, and also about obviously being immediately othered. I grew up in Brownsville, and I know what I look like, and I was considered too white by most people. But then I go visit my mom's family in Kansas, and people in that town, believe it or not, were like, "You're Mexican, aren't you?" I was like, literally, the first time a kid told me that, I was like, "You looked at me and said that?" Like, wow, okay. He meant it as an insult, but I was like, cool.
It was the fully formed mustache as a child.
Yeah, I know, I was like 12.
It's like a 5-year-old.
Exactly. But then you also talk about, you know, internal exclusion, and I remember, I do a lot of research into Mesoamerica, you know, where they're working that either of those two books actually, but other stuff as well, and I'll be on like an online forum, and they'll be writing in Spanish, I'll be responding in English, and one guy finally called me out, like, "Hey, we're talking about Mesoamerica, why are you talking in English?" And I was like, "You know they didn't speak English or Spanish, right? Like, you're just trading one colonizer language for another colonizer language." I'm like, yeah. But on the note of, like, recognizing each other, Laura, you sent me a bunch of links with artists and creators from Latin America. Could you tell us a little bit about some of those guys? I'll bring some pictures up.
Yeah. So first of all, I also want to answer to some
please.
things that have been said. So you said about, like, not understanding some Spanish, like sometimes, or every time I watch any movie that is not from my country, or even sometimes from my country but other region, I put subtitles because I don't understand. And sometimes
100%, subtitles
like,
always.
yeah, it can be like 10 minutes. I was watching this Argentinian movie, I don't remember, but it was like some kids from like some hood, they're like talking, I was like, I don't understand anything, not a single word.
If I could add to that, I surprised myself by finding out I could read Portuguese.
Oh yeah.
Because I'm bad at Spanish, but I can kind of read it. And I got to a website where I was trying to read it. I'm like, man, there's a lot of accents on this Spanish. But I read it, and then afterwards I realized, oh, that was Portuguese from Brazil. I was like, okay. But if I heard it out loud, I could not tell you a single thing somebody says in Portuguese out loud, because it doesn't sound like Spanish to me. I have trouble with it.
Yeah. And the other thing about is what Kat say about, like, if you're from here, are you really, even if you're second generation, are you really a Latina person? And it's like, when I first migrated here, like my first year, I had like so many questions about it. Then I think actually, because we trade one zine, and that was Gringa, that was the zine that we traded. And actually, that zine made me understand that, yeah, it's like I could relate like entirely to everything you were saying, and I was like, whoa, this is amazing. Like, she was raised here, and I was raised there, and I just could like, whoa, this was my whole experience there, with being a woman and all the expectations of like, sit down correctly, and like be very pretty all the time and never answer back and things like that.
It's the common traumas that we
Yeah.
share.
And but at the same time, and I feel like it should be a real like bridge between like authors from Latin America and here, and I guess every like or I mean I guess if this was a panel about Asian comics, they would like also say the same. I do feel that sometimes I feel like an alien here because I'm just like from a country that seems in another planet, and there's a lot that you miss. And I guess if you are in like biggest cities here in USA, like Miami or like New York, there should be, or some people say like, oh yeah, you go there and it's like you come back you come back to Latin America. And actually that's so weird. I had a dream that I was walking here in Austin, and suddenly I was in a neighborhood that was the same as Colombia, and I was like, whoa, like this really exists here. Well, like why I didn't came here before? But anyway, the experience.
We all have that kind of dream.
But yeah, the experience is very different. Like it's just like you just live in the street. Yeah, like everything is like vibrant, and it's like the street is like alive, and there's like people dancing in the street sometimes. Yes, I don't know. It's like strange things happen in Latin America.
More vibrant.
What?
More vibrant.
Yes.
Vibrant, yeah.
Yeah. Like I don't know. So I remember people like they and police didn't anything to do. Never do anything about this, but people like from in neighborhoods like they close a whole block just to do their own parties, and they have like these big pans cooking their food, and everybody comes and they call someone and someone calls someone, and there's like this big party like the whole weekend. It's like wow.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah. Yes. So anyway, this is a reference from my teacher in Colombia that created this collective called La Chimenea, and his name is Luis Echavarria, and it's kind of like a magic realism, where he made this book called Liborina, and it's about like some people that got lost in a town in Colombia, and then there's something related with the internal conflict of Colombia and the guerrillas, and then they have like this party, and then there's like some indigenous spirits coming out, and I don't know, it's very interesting if you want to look for it. And then I was also gonna say that there's a big, if you want to look for that, a big fest there that is called Entre Viñeta. And I think I was lucky because it was created by this kind of like comic, I don't know how to say it, like agent, I guess, I don't know. I mean, he doesn't publish, but he doesn't do comics, but he's like in the media. And
Basically Stanley.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right.
yeah. And
Promotes and says, yeah, it's good work.
so his name is Daniel Jimenez, and he created this festival with a lot of other people, and they have like Simon Hasemal went there, and it's like it was a time where Medellin wasn't like really a big place, and they also have this, if you wanna look for comic done in Latin America, Larva is a very good like archive. I don't know where you can get them because I thought they were like published online, but I don't think so. But maybe you could like write to Entre Viñetas.
And some of the links you sent me, some of them did link to other places where you could find at least a few issues.
Yeah. And they published, the Larva is by the same staff from Entre Viñetas, and they published like a lot of like comic artists in the 2000s in Latin America. And Power Paola, it's a big reference, and she's mostly like how you say it?
Autobiographical.
Yeah, autobiographical. And I think she's one of the most popular comic artists from Latin America. And she was published recently by Fantagraphics and another publishers, I don't know which ones they are. Yeah, very interesting. And like the series of books that made her like more popular is called Virus Tropical, which is also a movie, and it's in Canopy, that you can get Canopy free if you're in the Austin Public Library.
Let me know about that later, because I'm going to look that up.
Yeah.
I have Canopy at home. It's very useful.
Yeah. And it's animated with her drawings. And Danielle Lievano, which is also like very known, and it has like this minimalistic style, and it's like so beautiful. Yes.
So I was going to ask the rest of you guys, are there any either artists or comics or characters or pop culture things either from Latin America or Latino in the US? And by the way, I want to point out real quick, when I grew up in Brownsville, nobody there really said Latino, everybody said Hispanic. But then when I came up farther north, everybody's like, why are you saying Hispanic? That's a government word. And I'm like, this is what my family always says. So everybody in my school said, I don't know. So you guys have any creators or characters or things people should look out for? You brought up Condorito earlier. That's why I was going to ask about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess the first time I've seen an actual comic as a kid was the Condorito series, right?
From Chile?
I think it's from Chile, yeah. But visiting family in Colombia, they would just have it in their, like, I don't know, dining room table, and I'm just like, oh, what is this? I was 5 and couldn't read, but I was just like, oh, pretty pictures. The best way I can describe that series is basically like Archie Comics meets a hot bird guy, like Johnny Bravo-esque, because he always gets the ladies. So.
When she says hot bird guy, he's a cartoon vulture.
Yeah, yeah. With a little hat all the time.
He's a condor.
Yeah, he's a condor, yeah.
But he lives in it.
Yeah. But that was the first time I was like, saw comics in general. And then like here in the US, my sister introduced me to like Archie comics, and then I got into like manga eventually. But it wasn't until I started reading graphic novels in like high school, I came across Love and Rockets by Jaime Hernandez. And I love his work so much because it was also the first time that I've seen Latina characters written by a Latina creator. And so if you don't know his work, I would like look it up and just devour every single issue and book. But basically it's just about a bunch of Chicano punks from like the LA, I guess, no, not LA, it's from, no, it's from California, but it's like a specific part of California. But basically it's like their experience being like goofballs, and there's a lot of like drama, but they come from like a barrio, and there's not only like Chicanos, but they're also like Colombian, and there's like Afro-Latinas, and it's just like everyone from like different shades, different backgrounds. And it was the first time I've seen something like that, because in Archie comics, everyone's white, like except for like the token like black character.
There's like one, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I was in the same room as Jaime Hernandez a few weeks ago, and I didn't get a chance to say hi. I'm upset at myself.
He's very kind.
I've heard.
Yeah.
I was like doing things, and then I realized, wait, he was there, and I forgot. All right.
Oh yeah, was it BIPOC
Yeah.
Pop? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. He's really But his work is like really great. It inspired me to actually pursue graphic novels, and that's why I went to like SVA, to like the School of Visual Arts in New York, to study cartooning, because I was just like, I read, I think, the Education of Hopi Glass, which is one of his later like graphic novels, and I was just like, okay, love it, devoured it, love the characters, love the stories. I need to learn how to make a graphic novel, and that kind of started my whole career.
Just real quick, there's a lot of creators I could go through in a second, but as a character-wise, one that's always fascinated me is Calimán, who is like as far as I can tell, the biggest comic book star that's originally from Mexico, although the character himself is from Egypt, and his stories take place all over the world, but it's still a Mexican comic book, so, you know. He even has a live-action movie, which I think was made in the 80s, I mean, and I just...
In a radio show.
Oh, really?
It started as a radio show.
Wait, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. This is blowing my mind right now, because I read a lot of like 40s and 30s and stuff and like that, and a lot of them started as radio shows. You told me Calimán started as radio, and I didn't know this already?
Yeah, my uncles and aunts in Colombia, they were always like referencing Caliman, as they were, because they were in the town, in a town in the countryside. So the only thing like they could do in the time for entertainment was that, like a little radio. Yeah.
Like that. Well, before we move on, I wanted to talk about how Latinidad has been represented in comic books. And I want to warn you right now, I want to show some negative depictions. So I want to go through this for a second, all right? Starting off with the first Latin American superhero from DC Comics. And when not yet, sorry. And when I say Latin American superhero, I mean he's a hero in Latin America, but he's actually a white guy who's in disguise. And how he goes in disguise is, one funny move from anyone and I give the little twitch of my weep. That's his disguise. His disguise is to take on a really strong accent that is very fake, and you won't know that he's secretly an American who's saving the day. DC has since said that he's always been Mexican. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, and so that is... yeah, they do. And now Marvel will tell you their first Latino superhero is the White Tiger. But I have found a character from 1942, and I've talked about, or 47. I can't remember the year right now because I'm too tired. But as far as I can tell, I'm the only one that's talked about him online, because every time I try searching for him, I only find stuff that either I wrote or videos that I did on TikTok. Meet Pedro the Peril. Now, I count him as the first Marvel Latino superhero because they shoot him several times and he never even falls down, so he's bulletproof. His thing is that he is a bandito and he wants to be the best, most feared one in all of Mexico. I will give them credit in that nowhere in this comic does he really talk like the Whip. So that doesn't happen. I will also say that, for the most part, stereotypes in here aren't any further from Speedy Gonzalez, which has a massive following throughout Latin America. And when I describe somebody his story is that he wants to be the most feared bandito, and he does this by going to a town where everybody's suffering, finds out they're suffering because a rich guy's pushing them around, so he goes to go defeat the rich guy. And then afterwards he comes back and everybody's going, Pedro, Pedro, and he's like, they're afraid of me, right? Yeah, they're afraid of you, Pedro. I explained this to somebody and they go, he's Mexican Luffy? And I was like, he is! He's Mexican Luffy. Because his idea of being a pirate is saving people. His idea of being a bandito is saving people. Oh my God. Also his wife, Belladonna here, does most of the saving, so there's that. All right, so moving on. White Tiger. I don't like White Tiger. White Tiger, I don't like the original, I need to specify. He gets credit as being the first, not only Latino, but specifically Puerto Rican. And yes, his co-creator is George Perez, who is also Puerto Rican, but he was not written by George Perez. And his origin is literally that, remember it's the 70s, so that they had, Kung Fu movies were big and blaxploitation was big. And they had a team of 3 people that was one white guy, one black guy, and one Chinese guy that all had magical amulets. And one day they're like, we don't want to be heroes anymore. So they threw their amulets into the trash. Hector walks by, sees them in the trash, picks them up and puts them on. So the first Latino superhero in Marvel literally got his thrown away superpowers from somebody else's trash. And this is from the 70s. It's an actual line from and not even the regular comics, by the way, that's from the children's comic book version of Spider-Man. And he says, you've angered my Latin temper, Spider-Man. And I've always told people I want to use that now and be like, you're angering my Latin temper. Now, mind you, since then, oh, by the way, his ending is also really badly done, and that was done in the 2000s, but that's something else. But since he's died, and by the way, he's the only superhero in Marvel to have committed suicide by cop. Yes, this is actual how he died in the comics. Since then, they've introduced new White Tigers, and by say White Tigers, plural, because they twice created a female relative of his that inherited his powers without realizing there'd already been one. So he has his niece and his sister that are both White Tiger, and it's... That being said, the sister character has become a very big character in the comics, and she's now a much better character, but still. DC. Their first Latina character is Fire, and when she was first introduced, she's just like a superhero from Brazil. But very quickly they realized she's Brazilian, she needs to be a fiery Latina and hot. So since then, she's almost never wearing more than like 2 pieces of clothing that are tiny. Which, again, nothing wrong with that. People can do that all they want, but that's the stereotype. They figured, oh, the first Latina superhero, she has to be that. You know. Moving on. Okay, modern stuff. Okay, I really, personally, don't like Kyle Rayner as representing Latino culture. That's my reaction. So when I was a teenager, I was a big fan of the Green Lanterns because I love the idea that the best of every single world gets together to help people. And then one day they killed them all off and gave them to one normal white guy. And I was like, I'm done with this. And I stopped. I was a teenager and I just stopped reading DC at that point. I found out years later, they revealed that he's Mexican. And by revealed, I mean, as an adult, he learned that his biological father that he was unaware of was secretly a Mexican assassin. Now, again, I know that I'm of mixed heritage and I understand all that kind of stuff. But he didn't even know until he was in his 20s that his dad was a secret Mexican assassin. And since then, they've written him as if he's always been Latino. And there's like scenes of him in the JLA where he's holding a cross and praying in Spanish and stuff. All right. And then Hot Girl, I'm going to go by Wikipedia here because I don't read a lot of DC. I'm sorry. I know I'm a comic book historian. I don't read a lot of DC. According to Wikipedia, the Hawkman, Hot Girl legacy is one where it's passed down through reincarnation. So they die and the spirit goes to somebody else in the family usually. Well, apparently the previous Hawkwoman, an older white woman, died. And her relative was a 20-something Latina. And then she committed suicide. And then the spirit of the older white lady now inhabited her. So now Hot Girl is Latina. I don't know how I feel about that. Okay, so that's the background. Now, does anybody know about Tamale Gate?
Yes.
All right, nice. Okay, so a couple years ago, DC said, Hispanic Heritage Month, we need to celebrate this. Yeah, see, there you go. We need to celebrate this by having covers that honor Hispanic heritage. So they wanted all their Latino characters to be doing something. And specifically, the editors said they must be carrying food because you can't be Latino unless you have Latino food. So this was the first version of these two covers. Hot Girl is serving her teammates by being the waiter here to serve tacos. And Green Lantern is flying over Earth carrying a bag of tamales. And the reason we know about this is because the artist, who is Latino, who did this, was annoyed that he had to do this. He said, why is this what's representing my culture? And when he posted that on Twitter, used to be Twitter, I guess, DC was like, oh, no, that was never our plan. It was always a sample, a tryout to see what different ideas could be. So this is what actually ran for these two. All right. So I just want to point all that out. And I think that's the last one. I had the... Okay, so now to stop on a better note. Since then, there's been a lot of creators who are themselves Latino and getting involved in stuff. And we've got a lot more characters, Latina characters that have had a lot more involvement. Talk about exclusion. America Chavez here was always considered a Puerto Rican superhero. But she's from another dimension where there is no Puerto Rico. And the thing is, does that matter? Like, we consider Clark Kent white, but he's from another planet, so what's the deal? But eventually they took, okay, come in, what's your response?
I was just saying, you're blowing my mind right now.
Okay.
I never thought of that. But I automatically assumed Clark Kent was white, but is that me?
He was made by two Jewish creators, but everybody thinks of him as being this Christian hero.
Well, because he's from Kansas.
No, he was raised there. He's an English.
Raised from Kansas, and his parents.
Hold on.
Wait,
Superman's Clark Kent.
wait, are you just, we're both just finding this out now?
Hey,
What?
I want to blow your mind one more time. In 1986, they rebooted Superman's origin. And if anybody's seen that version, there's instead of the usual old-fashioned rocket ship, it's like a black rocket ship, shiny, looks like an egg. Well, they call it a birthing matrix. And the reason it's called a birthing matrix is because they want to say he was born in Kansas. And by the way, originally it was going to be worse. John Byrne, there's actually pages, you can find them. He drew Laura L. landing pregnant in Kansas, giving birth and dying. So they wanted to completely remove the idea that he was an immigrant.
This was Reagan's America.
Yes, this is Reagan's America, yes.
Remember that?
Now, by the way, America Chavez...
She defaulted, like, it's the little skin color card that they have in Family Guy. They're like, oh, this color matches Puerto Rican, so that's what you are. As soon as she appeared on the streets, like, there's one.
By the way, they brought in a Puerto Rican American... Come on, seriously.
It's the same.
I know, and I said it. All right, they brought in a Puerto Rican artist and writer, and she rewrote her origin, so now it turns out she's always been Puerto Rican. It was just a false memory of the other dimension, so...
Right.
Sure. Okay, all that background, thoughts?
I know this isn't a full history,
Oh, I'm
But-
running through quick.
Yeah, but there was one, he was like the DC version of Daredevil called Gangbusters. And
Oh, yeah.
he was either Mexican or Puerto Rican, I forget exactly what it was.
Well, he was in Metropolis, so I guess if they have a fictional New York, do they have a fictional Puerto Rico?
No,
Gangbusters is Gangbuster, yeah. But he's like
Marvel has a Crime Buster.
DC version of Daredevil. But anyway, I bring that up to say that he was only like a D or like a Z character, like
Yeah.
very rarely does he show up. But when he showed up, I fell in love. I was like, holy shit. I've never seen anybody represented like in Superman. Superman was my comic. I love Superman. So I bought that comic. I got that comic, and then I was like, Dad, I want the next month. He's going to show up in the next month. We bought it next month. Oh, he wasn't in there. Never shows up again. But when I
I had
grew
that
up,
same experience.
yeah, and then I grew up, and I was able to like go back, and so I went back and bought all the issues that he was actually in, and it totals like 8 or 9.
That's about right.
But that's the gold mine right there.
Well, I want to say I had the same situation with X-Men, because one thing I noticed even as a little kid, every X-Men that wasn't like a white male or whatever, they had to explain where they came from. Like Storm is black and technically born in the U.S., but she was raised in Africa. You know, there was Richter, who was from Mexico. There was Sunspot, who was from Brazil. And yes, I think the immigrant story is very important, but it also seemed to be the only story that counted unless you were white in the X-Men. And so the first time I saw an X-Men that was born in the U.S. but was of Latin American heritage was Skin of Generation X. So he became I had a whole fan page in the 90s on GeoCities of like every detail, every single character he ever talked to was on that page. Now, Skin, by the way, was from an inner city gang. Now, as much as that is a stereotype of the 90s, I had friends like that. So like, at the least I felt somewhat represented. So you want to say we're going to add something?
Well, it's just more that it's kind of like we got Robbie Reyes, the Robbie Reyes Ghost Rider on here, and he was cool and he had his own book, and then I guess like sales petered out and they just sort of started making it just more and more like normal Ghost Rider, and then his book got canceled. The same thing happened to like very similar thing happened to Static Shock. It really does seem that like we get these new characters every now and again, and DC and Marvel give them the old college try, and then they just sort of like, well, this isn't selling millions of copies like Superman or Batman. So clearly we don't need to bother putting any more effort into this character anymore.
So Robbie Reyes had a unique take on Ghost Rider, and then when that main series ended, they completely redid it and just said, he's always been a regular Ghost Rider. That being said, they since had him join the Avengers, and now it's established that he is canon the most powerful Ghost Rider that has ever existed. He is called the All Rider. Yeah, he can turn anything into a vehicle.
Do not give him a piggyback ride.
Yes, exactly. Anybody see the Eternals movie? Those giant celestials? He found a dead celestial, turned it into a vehicle.
Yeah.
And so he rode it as a fiery vehicle.
I was gonna comment on the static thing, the Static Shock, because that was originally part of Milestone Comics within DC Comics, and it was all black creators.
Well, mostly black, but other people.
Oh yeah, John Paul Leon
Other
was
people
part
of
of
color,
that.
too.
Yeah, other people of color, but it was mostly black creators, and then
Dwayne McDuffie was the kind of the.
Dwayne McDuffie, Dennis Cowan. They kind of bucked management, which got them canceled the first time, and then they relaunched. And I don't know that the original excitement for it was still there among, because if you notice, comics readers aren't getting younger. And so you have like guys like us, like, oh yeah, Static's back, hell yeah, let's go get that, you know. But you're not having a lineage growing up with it now. They're into the comics, they're into manga, anime, webtoons, yeah.
When they rebooted the Justice League and they put Cyborg on there, I was like, Cyborg to me is a Teen Titan. But if they wanted to have diversification, it should have been Static.
Right.
It should have been their Spider-Man on the Justice League. That would have been great.
That would have been an amazing story to see it through his eyes, to see like this teenage kid from an urban area join the world's greatest, the city of Dakota, which it's just like a stand-in for Detroit, isn't it?
Yeah, Detroit or Chicago. That
Yeah.
area,
But to see him go and become this like global hero alongside Batman and Superman, that would have been amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think just like looking at all this and I think about this all the time. I mean, I think there's just still a long way to go in terms, because like in all of pop culture, I mean, how many like big, whether it's superheroes or whatever, Latin, Mexican, anything, like, is there at all, in comparison, I just feel like, I mean, like these characters are wonderful. I mean, I love the Blue Beetle. I mean, they had the movie and everything as well. But I mean,
I love that.
Yeah. But it's just so, it continues to be so odd to me that like we're always kind of like left behind so much in a way.
They're not necessarily the leads in the universe.
Ever.
So it's not yeah, Blue Beetle's a fun character, Ghost Rider's a fun character, but who are the guys in Marvel and DC? It's like
Right.
Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Captain America, Iron Man. And when they take off the mask, it's a white guy.
Yeah, and like, I wonder like what is the solution to, like how do you create the character that like becomes,
If I could jump at that. There's a big discussion among creators of color, and this is mostly when I'm talking with black creators, and it is, do you take an IP that exists and either change them or make a new person take on that mantle, or do you make something entirely new? And I've had people tell me flat out, we should have our own characters from scratch, and I agree, but your character from scratch is never going to have the international recognition that the Flash has, and the Flash is just a costume. Anybody can be the Flash. So it's like,
We have a take on that, plus Waco Comics.
and that's why they exist.
And that's why we exist, because of the default characters always, or most of the time, being white. We wanted our characters to default to other ethnicities and races. So we have African, we have Latino, we have Asian characters from the jump, and they're the main characters in the stories. They're not like the sidekicks or the mechanics and everything. Like, I know Green Lantern's first sidekick is very problematic.
Well, yeah, the Hal Jordan. I don't like Hal Jordan in general. That's one of the many reasons.
Right.
Is his first sidekick.
But
we won't get into that right now.
But we've established from the beginning that all of our characters, they're just people with different ethnicities and different races, and they have superpowers. And we're going forward with telling that story. We'll have a white person here and there because that's how the world works. But not every character from the start is going to be a white person. So.
There it is. That's the solution.
Anybody want to come in with a?
I have a question to bounce off of that, is because the problem is that we have these characters that have been around for almost a century. And of course they were created by a very white-centric media.
And even when they weren't, they were designed for white-centric audiences.
Yes. And so the main thing is that you are creating original characters, and you don't have that essence of time behind you. So are you putting into place ways to give those characters staying power, so 40, 80 years from now, like they're like, how, like, do you have plans to grow them to where like it's like the new?
Yes. We do have plans. So what we're doing initially is we're taking classic tropes of heroes, of superheroes that you recognize and know every day, and we're putting our own spin on them. We're twisting them so that they fit our narrative, and so that we don't get sued. We don't want to get sued.
As I was saying earlier, file those serial numbers off.
But the other thing that a lot of these characters have, they have a lot of money behind them. And we're growing ours through our community. We're doing Kickstarters, and we're putting the books out. We're trying to get them on shelves in as many bookstores as possible. We did a trip up to Dallas and hit like 10 different comic shops. I think 2 of them bought, sight unseen. And we've since delivered those books. The longevity is money. And if we can get the money, like we build enough, we're reaching out to publishers. We're self-publishing, but we're also reaching out to publishers. We're not against having a Boom Studios or a Dynamite or Image even publish our books, because the bigger the reach, the bigger the influence, the longer the staying power. That's our plan. Yes.
Well, oh,
I'm moderating now, guys. You messed up when you gave me a microphone.
no, I want to get Miguel real quick, and then we'll get to Christine.
All right.
Question first.
Okay, question first. They both win.
So along those same lines, because you gave me the perfect segue, and I will fully admit, loaded question. I am a librarian. But my question is, are you working with your local public libraries?
We have a short story that we are turning into a young adult novel to get into scholastic book fairs and libraries, and we are working with local libraries. We have been to 2 Comic Fest shows in Waco
Fantastic.
at our local school districts. We're showing our comics to kids and teachers and everyone. We host little panels inside the fest and everything. So yes, we are working we love schools, we love the community, we love kids. And, we're hoping that they love us back.
Because that's as important as the money aspect, because you're making that emotional connection with the kids they are growing with the comic. So if they're growing with the comic when they're older, they are the ones that are going, like, this is a thing that I own, and I want to pass it down to you.
Right.
So, and I think that's one of the major things is people forget. But yeah, now these corporations, they have like the money, but they started with making that emotional community connection.
It's the shared story.
Yeah.
Like showing your kids Superman, like
Yeah.
look at this, or showing them Spider-Man for the
Yeah.
first time.
I have a slightly different take on that in
Do it.
that I don't necessarily have this capitalistic need to grow immensely and get my book. I mean, it would be nice, right? Like, money's nice now.
It's like, I won't say no if you want to make it into a movie.
Yeah, no. But it's not like the driving desire. Longevity is very important, and I want people to read it, but if you get it from the library, which I love librarians, thank you for what you do. I love teachers, thank you for what you do. But it's not necessarily the thing that's motivating me. And so I haven't, when I'm in comics, and I'm not going to speak for everybody here, but for me, I'm thinking of impact, but I'm thinking of impact of when the little kid picks up the book and sees somebody who looks like him. I'm not thinking of in some kid to read something that they wouldn't normally read. Then that's the way I measure success.
Yeah.
Did you want to?
Yes.
All right.
So I don't know a lot about the universe of DC, superheroes, but I do that's a very interesting question. Like, is you say prepare to have a mass media or like a character of people of color, what is called people of color, outside that it can reach like the whole country, and I don't think so, and because I think that those medias are like made like from maybe this is like very obvious answer, but it's made, those medias are made like for, I don't know, like 200 years. I mean, this mass media is like being built by 200 years or more. And and the distribution is made for rich, mostly like white people. And so if other people get it, it's like, okay. So it will have to change like the whole distribution system. So I don't know, I feel like very impossible. But I also want to say that I do, coming from Colombia, and I do have felt, and this is very difficult to explain, but I do have felt how these types of stereotypical representations has constrained me in connecting with people, I guess. Some people, because, I don't know, it's like they expect me to be the stereotype, and when they realize that I'm not that, it's like they don't know how to like relate with me. And I don't know, it's been very difficult. Like the place where I work, I love it, but I've seen how people that is, maybe they're Latinos or Latinas, but they're raised here, they're like second generation, or and I feel like, I don't want to like talk about anybody, but I feel like they know how to navigate this country, and like some other people, like they relate more easily with the rest of the people than me. It's like people don't really understand how to relate with that immigrant here, which is very weird for me because I don't feel like, I guess I have to ask an immigrant in Colombia, but I don't feel that's the case. And yeah, there's a lot to say there.
And with the idea that there's a lot to think about, this was our panel. And I want to thank you guys very much for being here, and I'll thank you guys a lot for being here. Please remember, booths upstairs, check out their stuff. Kat, your book's coming out when?
July.
July, because so you don't have a booth right now, but you have a book coming out in July. I got a book coming out in 2 weeks. All right, so thank you guys very much. Something you guys